It is my pleasure to introduce Johanssen, Associate Professor of Communications at St. Mary's University in London. Among other things, he's an author of a book, Fantasy, Online Misogyny and the Manosphere, a book on which also his talk at the Subversive Forum this Wednesday will be based. The title of the lecture Jakob will give is Algorithmic Masculinity, from the Manosphere to the Mainstream. So, for a general audience not familiar with the terminology, how would you define the concept of the Manosphere and what does it entail?
The Manosphere is an umbrella term. It kind of unites very different, sometimes quite disparate online communities, male spaces, where men assemble online and discuss various different things. What the communities all have in common is that they are distinctly anti-feminist and that they are explicitly and often very aggressively misogynist. Some of those communities are also quite explicitly racist and fascist as well.
As you have now alluded to already, but in your general analysis in the book, it is clear that the Manosphere as one constitutive element of what we could call the new right, that gender and sexual norms play a central role, and that there is something which for an outsider looks almost like an obsessive relationship to the sexual revolution of the 60s. So could you elaborate on that? Why this centrality of gender and sexual norms?
Yeah, I think there are two kind of dynamics to that. So on a more kind of general level, we find ourselves in what we could call a kind of gender and sex panic. That's definitely driven by the new right, and that simply kind of finds a particular articulation in the Manosphere as well, in the different communities of the Manosphere. So what I mean by that is we are now living in a time where sexuality and different sexual and gender identities are able to express themselves in ways that simply didn't exist before. We could say we live at a time where sexuality and related questions are very much sort of liberated, and there is a kind of freedom associated with that. That is then responded to with a kind of very defensive, very anxious panic, where lots of actors and also lots of institutions now feel that this new sort of sexual freedom that has been sort of evolving over time, as you say, since the 1960s, that new sexual freedom is a threat to the family, particular social orders, cohesion in society, etc. While we, of course, also know that that's not the case. So that's one kind of layer. And then the second layer to that articulates itself in the Manosphere, perhaps in a slightly different way, but it's also related to the first, where there are many communities, such as the incel community, for example, other male communities in the Manosphere, where those men feel that now we live in this time of sexual liberation, we live in this sort of post-feminist moment. Women now hold some kind of sexual power over men, and that is a distinct kind of achievement of feminism, and that's why men have been undermined, have been systematically undermined by women, and those men now feel that that sort of they'll need to reassert themselves, they need to kind of bring back a particular kind of male identity and things like that. Whereas at the same time, of course, we know that that's far from the truth. But it's how those men feel.
Your approach is explicitly psychoanalytical. You are a theorist who uses central psychoanalytical concepts to try to interpret such phenomena. And we know that there has been historically always the question mark over to what extent it is or isn't legitimate to apply psychoanalytical concepts to social phenomena ever since the attempted Freudo-Marxist synthesis of the 20s and 30s. So my question would be, what is it that psychoanalysis as a theoretical tradition specifically can contribute to analyze such phenomena, the new right, and as also the manosphere as an aspect of it, that maybe other approaches are systematically blind to in terms of their conceptual apparatus, their approach does not make certain aspects visible that maybe psychoanalysis can. What would these be? What would be the advantages?
Yeah, I think it is important to say that while I very much do believe in psychoanalysis, I'm not sort of psychoanalyzing those men, or I'm not sort of psychoanalyzing the manosphere in terms of where I would say, oh, this particular user is depressed, or this community revolves around a particular symptom or things like that, because that psychoanalysis is often, or kind of in its application, is often criticized for that. And I also kind of share that criticism, which is not to say that mental health and kind of discussions of mental health are really fundamental to lots of communities in the manosphere, but I'm not sort of analyzing as like a therapist would. So although it would probably help many of those men if they did go to therapy, that's kind of a different point. Why I'm using psychoanalysis is because I think it makes space as a particular kind of paradigm or as a particular way of looking at and researching phenomena. It makes space for complexity that other approaches don't do in the same way, and that can particularly be done if psychoanalysis is also kind of used in combination with sociological theories or kind of social theory and things like that. It opens up a kind of perspective on contradiction and things that seemingly on the kind of surface level don't make sense, or where there is a lot of sort of emotional investment that we can see in the content that is posted in the manosphere, the kind of debates that are happening in the manosphere. And there is a lot of contradiction there that's kind of driven by affect, that is sort of driven by also unconscious and interrelational, intersubjective dynamics that unfold when users come together in a virtual space. So I'm interested in all of that, and other approaches would only see the manosphere kind of on the surface level as something that's about misogyny or just hatred or racism, and kind of sort of stop there at that kind of analytical level. But psychoanalysis goes a bit deeper, I think, and while there is misogyny, racism, that's all very present, there is also kind of more to that, and I really try and show that in my work, that for psychoanalysis, hatred often goes together with love, or we can't kind of neatly disentangle aggression and more kind of loving or caring emotions, for example. These things are all very messily connected, and we see that in the manosphere as well, where there is actually lots of discussion, lots of kind of desires that are articulated that I would relate to things like recognition, even things like care, like love, wanting to belong, and things like that. And I would say only psychoanalysis can shed light on those dynamics.
Maybe to pick up on this last point, I would be now maybe more interested for you to elaborate the social context, because this is also something you touch upon. Like we're living in the 5th or almost 5 decades of neoliberalism, which of course has contributed to the erosion of communities. And how do you see the connection between the appearance of the manosphere and larger processes of neoliberalization of societies?
Yeah, I think that is a connection that we have to think about, because in a way, the manosphere, or if we take a particular community, the incel community, for example, highly misogynistic community, very, very toxic. Those communities are a symptom of the kind of extreme version of neoliberalism that we now live in, that we're all faced with, where there is an excessive kind of demand placed on individuals to make sort of your own luck in a way and fight for yourself, and you're all on your own, and if you can't make it in this world, if you don't work hard, etc., you've lost, basically. You kind of lost this sort of neoliberal game. You need to kind of learn how to play that game. And a community like the incel community, then they draw very wrong conclusions from that, where of course we see kind of neoliberal logics trickling down into very intimate areas of life, when it comes to dating, for example, when it comes to how relationships are formed, dating apps, etc. It's completely dominated by a kind of marketization. I need to kind of brand myself as this great individual, and then hopefully others will discover me and I'll end up in a relationship. And incels draw very wrong conclusions from that and say, oh, that's all because of feminism. That's all because now women hold sexual and reproductive power in society, so they get to choose who they want to be in a relationship with. And of course, that's not the case. But what that kind of touches on, and I think that is something we need to think about, is for many, and men I think in particular, there is a perception or an ideology that in today's neoliberalism, you can only be successful if you are successful in both economic and romantic terms. So those two are completely connected. So there is a kind of social capital and a kind of erotic or sort of romantic capital that you need to have as a man, otherwise you failed. So if you are successful economically, you'll be in a relationship, or if you are in a relationship, you also need to be have a good job, etc., etc. So those are felt realities for many, and I think we need to take that seriously in order to then think about how can we analyze it, how can we critique it, how can we perhaps sort of move forward from this and so on.
Do you think that the concepts of narcissistic wounds to masculinity combined with neoliberalization and the sexual revolution, these are constitutive elements of this toxic cocktail of the imaginary of the manosphere? Would that be a fair summary, or is that too simplistic?
Yes, yes, but I would say yes, absolutely. That is a good summary. But underneath that, there is more to that. So I think we need to kind of think about what's underneath that, because maybe I'm also a bit idealistic, but underneath that there are, as I said, there is a desire for recognition, there is a desire for belonging there.
Thank you, Jakob. We'll have to leave it at that. A very interesting subject, and whoever wants to deepen these debates, well, there are books by you published.